Schönen Nachmittag.
Yes, good afternoon. Rainer Nowak, Editor-in-Chief of the Press and the moderator for the next 1.5 hours. Back to the Salzburg Europe Summit, and at the beginning of Dialogue 1, Economy, Jobs and Finances, can European restart? The wording is that probably there will be no answer, no, to this question. I asked the Minister, Martin Kocher, Federal Minister for Labour. Thank you very much for this invitation. Hearty welcome. I'm very glad that I can attend this conference today, that I may offer this keynote speech. I was born in Salzburg, and it's always a beautiful idea to be here in the convention center of Salzburg. The past 1.5 years, as far as jobs are concerned, was an absolute exception. Let us just pass through these 18 months of the pandemic. In February 2020, we heard for the first time of this virus. Being the IS director then, I was asked how will this affect the growth. I said maybe some decimal points in growth. Fortunately, I added, if the virus remains in Asia and does not propagate to Europe. That were the expectations at that time, and a similar breakout of epidemics in Asia before stayed in Asia and did not propagate to Europe, but only to single points. But in March 2020, everybody can remember the first lockdown, something that has never been experienced in the European economy, nor in Europe, nor in the entire world. A quarter, sometimes a little bit postponed in time. What does that mean? Lockdown, downturn of economic activity at approximately 25% per week. The gross national product, we know how it is calculated. The private sector within a couple of days broke down within a couple of days by 50%. And the rest of the public sector is represented via the costs in the GMP and continued. What we have never experienced before, crisis of offers were restricted. You only were able to shop for that which you really needed. Restaurants were closed, many services were closed and could not be experienced. Something which economically is known only from natural disasters, where physical infrastructure is destroyed, and therefore the offers cannot be there. Of course, every now and then natural disasters happen. We have seen this in summer, where certain areas were closed off from the rest of the country, or where there are difficulties in transport. But normally it takes very short time and locally limited. For the first time since the Second World War, we have seen this lack of offer, which affected the world nearly at the same time. But there are, of course, individual degrees according to the propagation of the virus. There were measures that were had to be decided very quickly. Measures for the jobs market, short-time labor, short-time work. The press conference of the finance minister, 400 million for the short-term work. We thought that this is such a large amount. We haven't had this for a very long time. So the future was to show us that the amount was not sufficient. 1 week afterwards, there were a couple of billions, and now up to now in Austria, we have spent nearly 10 billion euros for short-term work to stabilize employment and to avoid unemployment. Of course, there were a series of other measures, liquidity subsidies for the companies, fixed cost contribution, lack bonus, as well as reschedulings of the different debts, social insurance and taxes, etc. So a series of measures that were set in order to stabilize in some way or other the economy. Then there were border closures for some weeks. It was difficult to cross the borders, and even afterwards there were restrictions that affected tourism and gastronomy, as well as the leisure industry. To come back to the present, it is shown that it was correct to spend all this money in order to stabilize the job market. The state, in my opinion, and that was the canon of all the experts, the state as a major reassurer has to appear as such. Such a development cannot be secured privately and would not make much sense. For these cases, it's the state which is the last major reassurer. Nevertheless, the economy in 2020 was decreased by 6.6%, and we as economic researchers thought, how could recovery look like? And during winter there was this letter L that was showing up in the prognosis, L for a downturn caused by the pandemic, and the lower part of L that we would have a long recession. Fortunately, this L has shown to be not a realistic assumption. We rather have a U-form development, and we do hope that this will remain. I am very cautious about prognosis because it's difficult to forecast developments in the health sector. We had a deep fall in March, April of last year, and then a long phase of stasis, except for summer of last year. But in spring and early summer this year, a massive upswing, which has, at that degree, has never been there. Also after the financial crisis, this upswing was not that as rapid. And the explanation why it was so rapid, due to the reducing of business activity in the services sector, opening all the trade shops, physical services, gastronomy, etc. This has led to the fact that the demand awakened very quickly. Optimism is on the uprise. We need staff, we need labor, and therefore this led to a boom which we have never experienced before. Additionally, and maybe we now turn to the European dimension and then to Austria. This, of course, was complemented by, there were a lot of measures that increased the trust in the economy. Next generation funds, the build-up instrument of the European Union, of course, has created trust. At the same time, the ECB has done everything to create trust in growth once the restrictions are not necessary anymore. The SURE instrument, short-term work, was a decisive factor for many countries to secure jobs, but also to secure income, which now is flowing into consumption because there's an increase of the savings rate. Short-term work, everybody knows it. I don't have to explain it in detail. Is in phase 5 now. In the top phases, we had more than 1 million in short-term work schedules, programs. If only half or 40 of them would have come into unemployment. This unemployment rate last spring would have been more than 1 million, so more than 20%. We can't imagine the effects in the social field. Of course, it cost a lot. I believe it was justified to spend these funds. In Austria, unemployment rate is on pre-crisis level. We have a record of open jobs in Austria. At the same time, an employment record. So it's most of the people in employment more than ever before. So the situation on the job market has stabilized to a good degree, but of course there are also posterior effects. I do hope that these effects will not remain. One point is long-term unemployment. Statistically, this is caused also by statistic effects, but also with the consolidation of unemployment during the pandemic. So it will be a great challenge with the Sprungbrett program to laid down to pre-crisis level the unemployment rate. And of course, the challenges that result for people with less qualifications, with less formal education, these of course have increased. So qualification instruments like many initiatives will have to be taken, so to help people to come to get employed again. Also in Europe altogether, the job market was similar to that in Austria. It is no surprise. It affected all the countries in more or less the same way. There was fiscal measures that ensured short-term work. The decisive point is, how are we going to continue? Can Europe restart? The restart has already happened. Many countries have high growth rates. But I think we should not be deceived by the fact that it is a great challenge, not only politically but also economically. And these are particularly the structural aspects of economic activity in Europe and the individual countries. It will be important, in my view, to have the funds of Next Generation EU and the build-up instruments, that these measures are connected with sustainable reforms, particularly in the states which have adverse productivity developments in the past 20-30 years. For example, Italy, but also other countries. Structural inequalities have to be reduced via these subsidies, because these inequalities in Europe, of course, these imbalances lead to the fact that there are different developments in Europe, different fiscal policies, and all the conflicts are caused between the countries, what the optimum policy is. Unemployment in Europe is still quite high. We're talking about 50 million unemployed people. It will be very important to promote regional mobility of people, particularly of those that have become unemployed, to have this imbalance between here, to avoid this youth unemployment in some countries, 25 to 30% in Europe. And in the Western Balkans, youth unemployment is in part 50%. At the same time, countries like Germany and Austria, Czech Republic, Hungary, we have a massive lack of youth labor. There is a more open post for apprentices. A second large challenge, in addition to regional mobility, will be to accompany the change on the job market. We have a strong change as far as green technologies are concerned. Digital technologies requires huge requalification measures, and on the European level and on the among social ministers, we're talking about this. I think a qualification has to be thought differently. We have qualification measures must be a normal thing to do, and we have to have a closer look that there are no groups who do not take advantage of this. But also older people, not just youth, where we have the impression in Austria, when once you've reached 50 years of age, you don't have to requalify again. This impression for the future probably is wrong, and the probability increases that you get unemployed if you're older. In my view, we also need a solid financial policy. These were exceptional years. All the experts agreed that it was necessary to increase the debts in order to avoid or to bump the economic effects of the pandemic. But in better times, it's necessary that debts and the budgets are designed in a way they are sustainable. The high growth, of course, helps in all countries to reduce the debts, but in my opinion, we must not be in the illusion that this is going to continue. We have recovered this growth, and the next years the growth development will get normalized. We will have a less potential growth due to overage and demographic development. It will be attenuated. Therefore, it will be important to develop instruments, whatever they are called, to have fiscal, to secure financial sustainability, and also at the same time to do the necessary investments. Cross-border work, last item. We thought, we saw how important this was during the pandemic, how often it was used in the home office, and also with the cross-border work. We see that there are still a lot of hurdles to overcome. Social insurance, tax matters, but also other hurdles that existed before. In the next years, it will be important to use this momentum to find attractive solutions for those who change in Europe between the various countries. Many proposals, we can have a closer look on some of them. At some of them, maybe a European law for the social insurance sector, so as to facilitate mobility. This will be more frequent, this mobility, than was the case before. Now, at the end, I think that the vaccination will be the decisive point when we talk about securing against the worsening of the pandemic situation. And this also would be a worsening of the job market and economy, a worsening of the expectations. I do hope that we succeed in bringing up the vaccinations to a level that the pandemic determines the economic development. This will be the case in the next months and also 1 to 2 years until hopefully it is a thing of the past. For us, it is important that we just do not focus and concentrate on the pandemic, but also the structural challenges that have arisen in the past years and have not been considered very much, and here a lot remains to do in Europe.
Thanks, Mr. Minister. Well, the state as the last, let's say, reinsurance organization, and states can reinsurance each other. I would like to start with the panel now. Maybe I would like to thank the experts because that they have come, and thanks that we also have the same amount of women and men on the panel. So Monika Bütler, she's the former Vice President, Science Task Force. you know both sides, you know the fight against pandemic, and also you know economy. And how is the restart working in Switzerland? Is this the same like in Europe, or is it different? Thanks you for being here. I'm the only one not a representative from the European Union, and I have the European flag in front of myself. Well, I can only, of course, agree 100% with the analysis of Mr. Kocher. We are already in the restart. We have seen this also in other countries. It's more or less the same situation in Switzerland, maybe with the indication that we have not such a strong decrease of economy. It's approximately 3%, more or less the same modalities as in Austria, and also with the same subsidies support we got. So we had short time working, it's 10 billion, it's more or less the same in Switzerland. We were a little bit more generous with the restrictions. We had less restrictions. One of the big differences was that schools were only closed 6 to 8 weeks in Switzerland. This led to the fact that the difference in the unemployment between women and men were not increased. This happened in other countries. In other countries, women were stronger affected. The employment rate of women was decreasing. Unemployment was increasing. This was one of the learnings. Well, let's go back. One of the big misunderstandings at the beginning of the pandemic, and that we probably thought we can just freeze economy like a mammoth and then revive it again. It didn't work with mammoth, it didn't work with economy. Economy, and this is maybe the negative side. The positive side is economy has adapted very quickly. This started already with day one of the lockdown. People organized themselves, and this was leading to a quite quick recovery out of the crisis. And I would just even say we recovered quicker than in the financial crisis, because the crisis was not in the system itself, but it came from the outside. Well, the learnings. Well, there is a tendency in the European Union, but also in Switzerland, that the state has concentrated too much on microengineering and not to give rules and regulations or guidelines for the economy and the necessary freedoms. Well, I think it's not true. We do not know where we are moving to. But we have some gaps where state activity is required. So I'm talking with two heads. On one side, I were with the head of the task force and the economy. Well, digitalization, we have seen in the pandemic that the gaps in digitalization are really a barrier to fight against pandemic, and this will also be the case with other requirements. Public health, I want to leave that aside. We did not succeed very well in nearly no country to see public health as an individual, as a public health and not an individual protection against illnesses. Well, we have also heard the development of the labor market. This recovered quite well. We do not know in which direction, but we know that the labor force, which can be automated, this is not only the low-income classes will decrease. We need more social support for these people whose jobs can be automated. Well, further education, vocal education, and then the next I want to say is the qualification about which Mr. Kocher talked. It's very important, and here we can learn from each other. One of the examples I would like to quote is my PhD students, and they have made this analysis. Dual education or training system has a lot of advantages, but only when the ones who do this apprenticeship are qualifying continuously. They are the ones who can just have this restart very quickly in Europe, and I think Switzerland is part of Europe. Thanks a lot. Let's start with that topic, with the labor market. Johannes Kopf, question to you. It's not so easy to understand and to see that short-time working was the means to fight unemployment. And on the other side, we have a lack of qualified labor force. Yeah, I think in the morning I gave a remark for the Falter, an Austrian newspaper, and more or less I copied what Mr. Minister said. Well, it's a little bit this is a little bit also the title of this event, Can Europe Restart? Well, Mr. Schausberger is not here. I do not know when you defined that title, but at the time we did not yet know what will happen, and what is happening now is extraordinary. Well, in my remark to the newspaper, I have this animal a comparison, young dogs who have to wait in front of the door and then they are let free. And you see this dynamical development on the labor market. What we see now is without any examples. We do not even have GNP. Like 2019, we have also reduced unemployment below 2019. So we can fill vacancies up to 40,000 every month, and still we have a lot of vacancies. So these are enormous effects. And the Institute for Economy tells us that there will be a certain correction downwards in the last quarter of this year. In the first quarter of next year, there will be less degrees because we have supplying difficulties, but still we expect 5% growth rate. We had this growth rate last in 1979. So a lot of surprising things are happening. Minister also said, and this is important, well, the title is old-fashioned. We have already restarted. We are higher than 2019, but then you have to look into the detail. There were also problems occurring during Corona, which we have not yet solved. For example, long-term unemployment. And still I have clients who cannot find a job despite the good situation, but they are unemployed for 2 years already. Second subject is we looked at the newcomers in the labor market, and there are groups who are in this strange situation that they were left behind. They could not cope with the new distance learning, and some could not pass their last exams and they will be on the job market later. So these are the so-called needs: no education, no job. The number of these young persons has increased, and here we have to do something. Two other items, Mr. Kocher also mentioned them. We have structural requirements to solve. Another topic, last week I was sitting together with the managing directors of the German labor markets from Switzerland and Germany. Well, there are certain challenges. For example, what is the role of the labor market administration when economy when accompanying. And here I'm a little bit afraid of the ecologists and not so much of the digitalization. Which offers will we have when the economic structure is completely changed and some jobs are decreasing? Some is just covered with short time working, for example, people working in the aviation business, and there, well, there are several factors. For example, also having online conferences. There, the full growth rate will not restart. So there are some challenges. There is no time to think about these things in detail because we have to cope with other problems now.
I think you understand more or less the ministry and Johannes, yes? So you're the chief economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in Poland. And as we spoke before, you're a little afraid of the older and of women, what happened to them during the pandemic, right?
Yes, so thank you very much for the invitation to this panel. I apologize for speaking English.
I apologize for speaking German.
There are large differences across countries in Europe in terms of digitalization. If you think about the share of people who shop online, it's 90% in Great Britain, it's 60% in Poland, and it's 30% in Western Balkans. But these differences are particularly visible if you look at people who are 55 years old or older. And there you see that in Western Europe, 2/3 of them buy online, but in new EU member states, that's true of only 1/3 of them, and only 10% in Western Balkans. And that's because people who are over 55 in new EU member states and Western Balkans have much lower ICT skills. And you see this also in studies of adult skills done by OECD and other entities. And my worry is that these older workers will be pushed out of the labor market by this accelerating digitalization. And that would be very unfortunate, particularly for new EU member states and for Western Balkans, because these societies are getting old before they are getting rich. So they are undergoing demographic transition at the income point that's much lower than the demographic transition that took place in other Western countries. They have large outflows of migrants, and they also have a much lower labor force participation of older people. So these three things create a perfect storm, because if these older workers now will be pushed out of the labor market because of their lower digital skills, this will be a big problem for pension sustainability. So one of our priorities should be to help these people stay in the labor force.
Christina Wilfinger, Sie sind SAP-Chefin Österreich.
Well, you are SAP, Christina Wilfinger, you are the managing director of SAP in Austria, but still, well, the question is there a kind of drifting apart of the society happening? Do we have a two-class society now, or to which extent are we behind digitalization in Germany and Austria? Well, I think in general terms, and that's the positive thing, in times of crisis, we were also always giving the rhythm for innovation. And I think we succeeded restarting the economy, but it will not be enough to have more of the same. Well, that speed in Europe must be accelerated. In Austria, we are more or less always in the middle, but this will be not enough. And you mentioned two important items. Mr. Koch also managed it when we, well, if we just, we know that a lot of people will retire during the next years, and of course, we also have geographical and demographical differences, and we must balance, of course, these differences. On the other side, especially in the Eastern European countries, we have a high youth unemployment where also digital abilities are lacking. And I think the figures are quite open and obvious. We have a lack of 20 million IT specialists in Europe, and there is I'm not talking about the digital skills, but only because when you work with small enterprises or with the big players in Europe, but also with the public administration, they all will agree that specialists are missing. But the big question is, how can we get digital skills into 80% of our labor force? And this is more than just thinking about digitalization. We have to bring digitalization into the broad masses of the population. Only then can we keep the speed. And I think that means quite a lot of work. Well, you are also the managing director. You are sitting in the board. Where are we today, Mrs. Schlie? You are a member of various supervisory boards. So, well, let's not only discuss labor market, let's also financial politics. Well, there is a lot of ideas to cope with these problems. What would you say? I would ask the question, well, we have to expand these ideas to the European area. I'm a convinced European, and the restart has succeeded, but we should not forget that economy in the European Union was stronger suffering than in Asia and the United States. We are recovering, but we are not recovering so well like economy in America. So we are talking, compared to the United States, we are talking about a decreasing share in the global economy, and this is a threatening scenario which has strengthened during the last 30 years, and we should not make our situation in the European Union more beautiful than it is. There is a good tendency. We have a good labor market situation. We are growing, but we are not growing as fast as the competition. And that's where we have to find the reasons. Well, in the European Union, this has been discussed already. We are not as dynamical with digitization, and this is especially concerning platforms. The United States and Asia have this B2C platform scenario already fulfilled. Well, we are more or less without chances. We have the big chance to speed up with the B2C platforms. This initiative has been existing for 10 years, and only 10% of the German enterprises have accepted that. So we have a dramatical need for compensation. Well, as B2B, we say this is where we are strong. That's true, but I want to give you another important aspect. This is the lack of capital in Europe. In Europe, we have a lack of capital, which is quite dramatical. And this is leading to the fact that in Europe, we have 36% of the startups all over the world, but only 14% of the unicorns. In the United States, you have 45% startups and 50% of the unicorns. And this shows a very big weakness, not only in the existing economy with the big corporates. We have a problem with digitization, but also what is growing, what is coming, is financed by external capital. And an example, 13 enterprises which were evaluated by 1 billion and which were founded in Europe after the, well, so, but only 7 are still in Europe or in European hands. That means what's happening here, we have a lot, big potential of innovation, but we are not able to keep it in Europe and to and here we have to rethink. It's not talking about official or open or public capital. We also have to approach to private investors. Property is existing, but we have to give stimuli so that big corporates, family enterprises do that, give or invest their capital into European enterprises, because otherwise the innovation in Europe is bought, is sold from the very beginning. And another problem in the European Union is we have not succeeded to have uniform tax laws. What happened in Europe during the last 30 years led to big advantages for American IT enterprises, because we could not agree in the in Europe as far as tax is concerned, and we have these hybrid structures, we have different laws, and a lot of billions have not, taxes have not been paid in Europe. And this is the core problem of the European Union. We do not agree. And a minimum tax, we do not even know how this will look like, but a minimum tax will not solve that. And in that policy, also in the tax policy, a lot of damage has been occurred. And we liked over-regulating. We like this massive problem, and this is over-regulation of the economy. And of course, this has been repeated again. This DSPVO is important, this data protection law, but we should not forget it's also a barrier for the development. In Germany, 5 billion were made available for startups, and only 300 million have been received. First, it is difficult to apply for these funds, and then there is this over-regulation, and I know from IT, but lots of them have moved to Singapore, to the States, or to Switzerland. So we have to think about that subject. And individual state initiatives will relieve the problem a little bit, but the dramatical development in the digitalization should not be forgotten. We were talking about the lack of highly qualified labor. Only in Germany, 100,000 IT specialists are lacking. Well, it doesn't help to talk about that. We need a new law for qualified labor. Canada has shown how this works. We need IT specialists. I wrote my thesis about the long-term unemployment, and I know this subject. We have to invest into the field of lifelong learning, but it's an illusion to think that all that labor force in Europe can be upskilled in order to fulfill the requirements of the economy. This will not work. Thanks very much. This was a very realistic approach, and I'm sure that IT enterprises have their problems with this law for data protection in Europe.
Before we go to Willibald Cernko, I would stay with Willibald Neumayer. So this cautiously worded, this critical report on the European industry seen by the Industrialists Association. I'm quite grateful to Mrs. Schlie, because openly, quite frankly, let me at the beginning say, why is this topic we're discussing right now, why is it the decisive topic for Europe? because as far as security policy and geopolitically is in the way of losing its role. And I quote, and I think we may, security policy, it is the vegetarian among the meat, it's the vegan person. We all have seen how this deal was operated, this new Atlantic, this new direction. If Europe wants to play a geopolitical role in the economic area, which is our last strong point, we have to continue to play this role. The internal market, 450 million consumers, 21 million companies, 50 billion GDP, and that's our heritage. But our heritage will just help us as a tourist destination. So this decisive question whether Europe will have this geopolitical role. We're talking about other items, but the important thing is that we talk about this topic. I also definitely say this who is very active for Europe. This geopolitical role, 70% of the upswing is from the production sector, by the way, together with the credit economy. What does that mean? We have to face enormous challenges that have already been addressed. We have to strengthen our strengths. That's currently not that easy because we have a lot of challenges. For the production, it's bottlenecks, logistics, raw materials, specialized labor. A blue card is good, red card is all fine. It has to become more attractive. It's in the Ministry for Internal Affairs. We have to think this on a global European level, otherwise we will not have a chance. So let's deepen the internal market. Also a number of other items, overall specialized labor strategy. This is something that affects us massively, not just the production. Particularly, we have to think how, if we have rebuilding plans in Europe, how can we put them together in networks? For us, for example, it's important that the CE regions these are our new home markets. We have to think this in a more combined. We need a European industrial policy. That which is formed in these fields. What are the fields we want to have? We're talking about semiconductors. We all know we have cars that are delivered later or delayed. That's an industry which we want to further develop in the future. Let me just give one remark here. That's not the end of globalization. Quite to the contrary, a country like Austria, where 53% is the source of welfare. We have to think of the value creation change, but that's not the end of the globalization. I can only recommend that we work on these free trade as agreements also with Australia. Having a look at what is happening in the Pacific, China now wants to join this treaty, etc., etc. That's an appeal to think more globally and to see that the future of this continent really depends on the economic strength. So also on my side, appealing in favor of the free trade. I'm very grateful. We're glad for this. We'll have 4% growth this year. You're having troubles in the industry, specialized labor, high prices, etc. But the geopolitical play is going on also in the Green Deal and in the digital transformation. And I say this as an industrialist representative. We are fully committed. This contrast ecology or economy, maybe this is for NGOs, but we don't need that anymore. The industry is committed, but the way has to be realistic, has to be smart and intelligent. If we don't go it in a smart way, we will cause damage here, so that this geopolitical play cannot be game cannot be won. You said that the climate change. I expected it even earlier in this panel. Willibald Cernko, maybe that's maybe surprising that a member of the executive board of a bank is asked, but there is hardly any area that has reached this problem, although this not that known in the public. Is this the case? And if it is the case, please describe it. I don't want to challenge you or to oppose you, but in my competence for the customer business, I want to open this angle. I certainly have at least one qualified business customer contact a day. And talking to entrepreneurs, and that's the small entrepreneur to the OMV, there are three issues. Number one is the supply chain. Yes, we're living in a complex global world. And the question, are there any lessons learned? No, we will remain in a global world. We will have to get better in one field or the other. The second issue is ESG. This is that's a top executive issue. But I also learned that we focus on the E, on the economy, and the S, the social. There were a lot of remarks before as far as qualification is concerned. But the business models of tomorrow, are they designed in such a way, or are we prepared with our skills so that the business models of tomorrow can be complied with? The topic S has a dramatic significance. The sustainability reports of the stock exchange, if I have a look at them, that is rather a chapter of subordinate significance. We have to state this quite clearly. The third issue, I also have to state this because there is often the question whether we believe in this. What can then fail? It's not difficult to say. It's politics that could lead to failure. The companies need planability for the next 10, 15 years. What we do not want is that for reasons of elections, somebody's turning off to the left or to the right. For example, you know, the Weinviertel region, the woodworker there, with his customers in Vienna in the first district. If he knew that as from that 6 months as from now, he can only reach the center with an E-driven transport van, he will probably not be glad about the ESG. But if he knows this is going to happen 5 years or 6 years, okay, I'll change this. And of course, the politics is requested to take action so that this company can then adopt to the new situation. And the second issue, news that restart, I think this fact is often forgotten that a lot has already happened. Yes, of course. But if we have a look at what has happened in the past 2 to 3 years, the dynamics of these issues, that's really gigantic. That's impressive. I have tried to get a clearer picture. 2018, in Austria, all the investments in environmental protection have amounted to 3.2 of GNP. Austrian, the European average is 2%. the investor behavior 2015. In Switzerland, Austria, and in Germany, there was 5% of investments were used for ESG conform investments. In 2019, in Switzerland, 35%, Austria 15%, Germany 5%. And today we must say there is no institutionalized investor doing an investment that is in ESG conformity. And I could show you a lot of other examples that happened in the past 2 to 3 years. That is to say, a lot, really much has been done. And we're talking about refocusing a new direction of focusing. And the third item that is very important, it has also been addressed today. Can we imagine that every 3 to 4 years the European Union has a budget of 750 million, which the taxpayer has to pay? Why don't we use the capital market? Where is the capital market union? If we believe that this topic is a topic of opportunities, why can't the citizens of Europe share? Should they use the piggy bank and have real losses? So the capital market and also risk capital, and I agree with what you have said before. And the minister called it fiscal sustainability that is to be achieved. For me, these are essential topics. Liquidity must flow, and the citizen must participate in this growth opportunity. Even the glass isn't half full, it would be difficult. A fiscal union would be important. Yes, of course, it would not work differently. You have to see Europe as a European economic area. We need rules of the game, whether it's harmonization of the tax law, whether it's rules of the capital market, or whether it's the job market, whether it's training initiatives. These are all at the level of the talks that I have with my customers. So fiscal union, is there somebody to challenge this or to oppose this? I can't do this as a moderator. I would like to focus on this point. What else do we need in addition to the capital? We need a uniform innovation promotion. The instruments are designed very differently. We have a situation, for example, countries like Singapore have here 70% of the personnel costs in research and development are being reimbursed. And for financing such projects, we need a larger EU budget if we want to regulate this uniformly. And the rules that are here in Austria with 1 million or 2 million in Germany are in no way sufficient. So innovation promotion at a level of billions in China is flowing into China and also the United States. And here we are very cautious because we are talking about this effect taking them with you. Innovation effects, you were addressing them. Let's say 50% of new business models of the digital business models, they also serve this purpose of sustainability. These are topics that benefit from each other. There are companies that measure the carbon footprint of any company. So the need can be satisfied. The government, of course, supports climate goals, but not too cautiously. And Mr. Neumayer, protectionism is the wrong answer. The world economy is so much networked. The European Union, 400 billion are imported as a volume from China and only exports 200. So this imbalance that is growing, but the economy is connected. Protectionism is the wrong way. And we want to be similar to China, but we have to be similar to China and the US in the way we promote innovation. And here we are at the back end. This is a request to politics on a European level to think of a promotion that is significant. Everything we're doing up to now is just a drop on a hot stone, as we say. I would like to have a look at the quote.
Digitalization is like a tsunami. We can't stop it. We made a strong commitment to low carbon future, but we need to also admit to ourselves that these are huge changes, huge structural changes that will be taking place in the economy that we need to be ready for, right? So if you think about digitalization, academic studies show that access to fast internet allows firms to increase their market. They can start exporting from subnational producers, they can become national producers. But there is a flip side to this. Better access to internet also means greater competition. If you think about now low carbon future, we need much higher carbon prices. We need huge changes in relative prices because we need to change patterns of our consumption. And what that means is that very productive firms, profitable firms will be able to adjust, and smaller, less innovative, less productive firms will go out of business. And that means that workers will have to be moving from one sector of the economy to another, from one firm to another. So we need to prepare the society for these changes, and we need to have a system which in Europe, fortunately, we do to a large extent, but I think we'll need it even more, that protects workers but not jobs. There must be a understanding, a consensus in the society that these big changes are coming and that, you know, lifelong employment is no longer something that's viable.
I just wanted to have include one thought. The question is, does it really make sense to use so much time on the expansion of the public transport? Wouldn't the broadband, the highway, we need to compensate for the structural inequalities, whether it's the Western Balkans or regions in Europe? We have seen that in the lockdown, what that means. Within 1 week, everything had to be done from home. And when some of us have lost this direction, but it was not possible anymore. So these new qualifications, that's the conclusion, as I said. I would like to add here to the colleague, to Javorcik. I think for us it's important as a European. I think infrastructure or platform economy, that's also a term that has been in use in the discussions for more than 2 years. And Mr. Cernko, I think the will of each company is there to take responsibility seriously. It's a top executive job, but the courage to really do it. Sometimes innovative, disruptive ideas, and innovation has this connotation of doing something differently and let's create something new. This has to do something with a failure culture, and this definite trying out. This is something which I see that is missing. Also promotion of innovation that must be made available so that I can afford this efforts. Only if I can try it out, I can see whether it works or not. And the trend in Europe, but also in overall Europe, maybe the Nordic country are a little bit ahead here. Things do not happen because certain regulations are placed in place. It is said, well, I'm trying to now. That is something we have to do. We have the intellectual capital. Yes, infrastructure has to be expanded, but with this key effect of platform economy, the element is to try out things and then to consume and take things that work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What has already been done in China, in the US, to reinforce this innovation power with a new power, and it has to become part of our society. I don't have this impression that it has already been perceived by our DNA. We have been thinking a lot about digitalization, and there is on the one hand the fact that the specialized labor is lacking, but the major challenge is here the qualifying up the existing employees in the companies. The companies say we need people con IT skills. Which skills? When we ask, and then they don't know. Nobody could determine definitely these IT skills. We have this digital skills initiative working together with 170 companies and with researchers, and there is a research board and also an easily readable report. Two issues were important to me. It's not concrete tools that I address because they change all the time. It's a digital basic knowledge, but basic knowledge can also be a higher level. My mother is in the wheelchair. She is more than 80 years and has a lot of time to deal with her laptop. But as soon as she changes the Windows version, she can't operate it anymore 4 weeks because the button is somewhere else. And this basic skill to be able to deal with a similar tool to teach this is certainly a larger challenge than just teaching one tool. But what is more, what is concerning us more, the lowest knowledge of digitalization and digital is with the executives. In particular with this SME strategy. And there are so many executives who don't have a digital strategy and can't even develop it because they don't understand it. Thus, it's difficult to reach the employees. Small companies have some nerd or a fanatic who is dealing with this. I know publicans that they lamenting about this cashier because nobody was telling them how this can be reprogrammed. But how can we actually reach executives, software tools that cannot communicate with each other? So a lot of money is spent in all the companies to reach these and to do this. I think here we still lack the idea how can we reach general managers of SMEs.
So I would like just to say innovation promotion and funds and the role of the state. I'm always getting a little bit nervous when we talk about innovation funds, because a lot of these models have failed in Europe. And I only want to say when we just use promoting and subsidy strategy from the States to Europe, it would fail. Sometimes I have the feeling we can determine a lot, but what is more important for innovators is to have the good protection. What are the good tax regulations? Well, in certain parts of Switzerland, startups have been supported by tax regulations. This helped a lot. It has to do with how people are trained, how you work with companies which went bankrupt, this so-called failure culture, and also with education. It makes sense to think, where do we need the state in which role? And when there is too many subsidies, when there is too much engineering, then we risk that we are going into the wrong direction. Another example also from the pandemic, Switzerland has succeeded to restructure or to have a creditor system for enterprises. Why did this work? Because the state made funds available and banks knew how to do it. My sister is an entrepreneur. On Thursday at 5, she made the application. On Friday, she had the money on her account, because that connection between the knowledge, sometimes the state doesn't know what is wanted, but on the other side, there is the big direction has to work. And here I think Switzerland had an advantage that we had this discussion after the financial crisis, which, well, maybe it has also to do that the trust, the confidence of Swiss politics into the banking system is changed and is different than in Austria. No, I don't say this is the trust which was there from the very beginning, but trust which had to be developed after the crisis, because both sides wanted to achieve something. Before that, it was not so clear. Maybe a remark concerning promoting innovations, Mrs. Bütler. I'm happy that you talk about this project promotion as we did it in the European Union is not successful. The applications are too difficult. Well, societies like Max Planck or Fraunhofer are very successful when we talk about innovation subsidies. And that's why there is the reason to make this innovation to give innovation subsidies on a broader base. There shouldn't be somebody in a ministry deciding about this application who probably doesn't have the digital skills, but have a broader promotion. That means a promotion of every developing and research activities, because thus we can exclude this decision, this is a good or a bad innovation. And like that, it's working quite successfully also in Singapore, where a lot of German software and IT specialists are working, because here they get 70% of their expenditures recharged or repaid. We have to think differently about innovation. And another topic which was not yet mentioned is the topic of education. Well, in the German Bundestag, we have only a few digital experts. How should digitalization of the institutions be promoted in a situation like that? It cannot work, because the only representatives who have digital skills are overburdened. I think we have to change the European education systems as far as entrepreneurship is concerned. We are talking to have interdisciplinary studies at the universities, and we have a lot of examples. The European Commission has published already a paper about the micro potential, also which play an important role in the field of lifelong learning, though this complete flexibilization of the education system. And we have to solve that, because our education institutes should be changed. And it should not be only training beyond the requirements of the labor market. I'm working as a teacher at the university in Munich myself, and I see how they work there. And we really have to, well, all these research targets are very important, but we have also emphasized digital education of people, where sustainability and entrepreneurship are important, and we should teach them how to found and how to manage an enterprise. Yeah, one sentence, we have tried it. Well, we have tried it, but then sooner or later we changed the situation. The taxpayer has to finance that. You made this wonderful. It took us some time, but at the other end, I have to say, at the middle of last year, we were quite criticizing, or we had discussions, if this broad-based flooding of the economic system with liquidity makes sense, if we should not concentrate on some areas. Today, I can say it was right. If we had quarreled for months which field gets which, it would have been bad. And I think it's also the reason why we have this restart, because we supported everybody. Sometimes it's better to use the simple way. Yeah, you are completely right. There was the question, and it was a very political question. Well, I listened to the financial minister. I will not do anything in order to feed bankrupt enterprises. Also, we have also an analog or a similar topic, which is a good example how it can work. And this was the investment premium in Austria. This was foreseen specifically for digital or ecological innovations, 14%. It started with 1.5 billion. Now we have 5 billion euros, and this is a deciding factor of the restart, and it's investing into the right fields. I talked with Hermann Hauser. This European Innovation Fund is ridiculous. We have to invest money, and we should not stop by filling the right forms or the right documents. Well, there might be sometimes an enterprise deceiving the state and getting the support, but I think we have all a big responsibility. Well, the big enterprises are much better developed than the small enterprises, and it's really good to give to exercise a small pressure also for the suppliers to take also a small enterprise.
We are using the talent we already have in the best possible way. I'm very worried that because women have taken a step back during this pandemic, we will reverse the progress we made when it comes to gender equality. We have already heard that in Switzerland, unemployment among women is lower than in other countries, because in most countries, women picked up the burden of homeschooling. They've retreated from the labor market, they cut their hours, and if they continued working, they were more likely to work at the kitchen table than in an office. Men were working in the office, most women were working at kitchen table. And very often this was a rational decision that was taken at the household level. If the man makes more money than the woman, it makes sense to prioritize the male's career. However, this argument fails in the presence of gender wage gap and glass ceiling. Because we have a gender wage gap and a glass ceiling, women make less money than men, men's careers get prioritized, and women will continue to make less than men. And we are creating a vicious loop here. So we really should be looking at what's happening to the skilled women in labor market to make sure that we are using their talent in the best possible way.
May I add another group to the table, and that's migrant workers, especially the children of migrant workers. It's so important that we keep their skills and that we really support them in their way into the labor market. And I think there are different ways to do that, but if we don't start relatively early in the education, we lose many of them.
I'm so sorry, but I have to cut. We have to. It's a very famous wording in Austria. Time's too short. bedanke mich ganz herzlich für Ihre Diskussion, die so...
I really would like to thank you for your discussion. I have still 20 questions not answered. I wanted to discuss with you the German elections, the future French elections, but this subject will be given transferred to the next panel or to the next conference. Thanks a lot and have a nice afternoon.